you and I need to examine how this case abruptly shifted. The evening broadcast was interrupted with breaking news. A massive behavioral shift in the hunt for Nancy Guthrie. The 84-year-old mother of Today Show host, Savannah Guthrie. Local deputies and the FBI pulled a suspect into the interrogation room, locking down an individual for intense questioning regarding Nancy Guthrie's tragic abduction. A key individual is now officially detained for this investigation. The broadcast anchors handed the live coverage over to field reporters. From a profiling standpoint, Friday night was the turning point. Under the cover of darkness, tactical teams aggressively executed a search warrant right inside the quiet Catalina foothills area. The target was a residence situated dangerously close, barely 2 miles away from the exact location of Nancy Guthrie's house. Investigators also locked their focus onto an abandoned Range Rover. It was strategically parked at a fast food restaurant only a few miles from the primary search radius. Stick with me on this case. Hit subscribe and turn on every notification. Now, newly discovered doorbell camera footage from a Catalina foothills home merely blocks from Nancy's neighborhood began circulating online tonight. And the video was captured just last night. It reveals a masked individual wearing gloves, brazenly walking up a private driveway in total darkness to steal potted cacti. Local reporter Jacob Owens broadcasted live from the foothills, explaining exactly why this bizarre footage triggered such deep psychological concern tonight. The reporter confirmed the escalating tension. In a normal context, a petty theft wouldn't raise alarms. But the psychological landscape here is completely fractured. This bizarre incident happened less than a single mile from Nancy Guthrie's residence in the foothills. This is a community trapped in a state of high anxiety for months. Tomorrow hits the 90-day mark since Nancy Guthrie vanished without a trace from her foothills home. That is 3 agonizing months of uncertainty. So watching a masked man trespass onto private property understandably sparked intense fear and suspicion for a neighbor who spoke to the press. Take a close look at the footage. The terrified neighbor who actually uploaded this video from last night desperately wants to remain anonymous. Naturally, but they point out that the recording captures a gray Ford F-150 pulling into their driveway right before 11 p.m. Seconds later, a suspect actively concealing his identity with gloves, a face mask, and a cap steps out of the vehicle. He methodically walks toward the front of the residence and starts loading multiple potted cacti directly into the pickup bed. The unnerved homeowner uploaded the footage to a security app where paranoia helped it spread like wildfire across the Catalina foothills. Reporters contacted the sheriff's department to see if investigators were analyzing the footage. Authorities claimed they hadn't been notified about this specific prowler, but promised to monitor the escalating situation closely. And while there is currently no hard forensic link tying this prowler to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, one interviewed resident stressed that the exact location of this, despite the heavy police presence already saturating the area, makes this brazen act deeply shocking. It is an uninvited stranger violating your personal boundaries in the dead of night. It might just be a minor theft, but that kind of boundary-testing crime is deeply disturbing. It reinforces a psychological reality for the community. You have to stay hyper-vigilant monitoring, not just your own home, but your neighbors too. The reporter emphasized that this serves as a critical behavioral trigger for locals to review their own security cam. Check those smart doorbells, because the Pima County Sheriff's Department, now almost 3 months into investigating Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, is practically begging the public for any digital evidence. The local news segment then wrapped up its live field report. As an analyst, I can tell you law enforcement abandoned the wide net for tactical surgical precision. They are done blindly hunting for clues. They are actively boxing in a very specific human target. For over 78 days, we watched frustrated detectives exhaust every single lead without recovering the missing mother. Grid searches and reward money failed entirely until day 79 broke the pattern. The FBI and local deputies executed highly coordinated warrants near Nancy's residence. Simultaneously, they detained a suspect for intense interrogation as part of a very deliberate, calculated psychological squeeze. Let's look at this evidence together. Federal investigators do not deploy this level of tactical manpower on a hunch. Getting a judge to sign off on multiple warrants requires hard forensic evidence and undeniable probable cause. Covert surveillance was established, and physical trace evidence was bagged to violently push this investigation forward. A massive evidentiary breakthrough pointed detectives straight at a 37-year-old local resident named Luke Daly. Daly is a convicted felon whose criminal profile was already intimately familiar to local and federal agencies. Even though Luke Daly hasn't been formally charged yet, decoding his exact involvement is the absolute priority. You and I know how the public misreads these moments, but this highlights exactly how high-stakes forensic operations actually function under extreme pressure. Because in reality, within complex psychological investigations, throwing someone in an interrogation room is rarely the finale. It just triggers the deep forensic analysis, a tactical operation executed with cold clinical and surgical precision. Tactically, law enforcement didn't just storm that residence to trigger a loud public spectacle. Instead, they stopped Daly in a nearby parking lot, executing a highly calculated behavioral maneuver. Snatching him off site gave detectives massive psychological leverage while they executed the search warrant. Back at the house, Dai's mother was also taken into custody. Detectives interrogated both of them, eventually releasing them both. But while they sweat in the interrogation room, that forensic search dragged on for hours. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed the physical evidence seized from that raid is now undergoing intense laboratory analysis. This is psychologically critical. Walking free doesn't mean you are cleared. Remember, Sheriff Nanos has already publicly cleared other potential suspects by name throughout this investigation. He hasn't done that here. His absolute silence speaks volumes. To really grasp the psychology of this operation, you and I need to look closer. We have to analyze the forensic map, specifically those black gloves found early on. Discovered 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house, those gloves carried male DNA from several completely distinct contributors. That detail complicated the entire profile because mixed biological samples are notoriously stubborn to isolate accurately. Investigators are not simply dropping a single profile into the CODIS database and praying for a hit. Instead, several different forensic labs are working together right now to isolate clean, usable genetic markers. This agonizing process takes months, which naturally fuels public paranoia and a wave of false assumptions. An empty handcuff today doesn't mean failure. Behaviorally, it often points to a massive building case. High-stakes forensic murders move painfully slow because detectives are building something much stronger than mere suspicion. They are securing prosecutable certainty. And honestly, Luke Daly's prior criminal record adds a very dark layer. Public files reveal a history of narcotics, felony evasion, and possessing illegal weapons. That shows high risk tolerance. Past behavior never proves current guilt, but it absolutely explains why police flag someone as operationally and psychologically relevant. That holds especially true when suspect geography, criminal history, and forensic evidence suddenly collide. Spatial behavior is everything here. Dai's home sits inside that exact 2-mile bubble investigators flagged right away. When police demanded that neighborhood video, their specific search zone was far from random. They mapped it heavily around evidence, recovery zones, and expected suspect movement patterns, along with major camera blind spots. Geographic profiling narrowed right onto that neighborhood. But does living there mean guilt? Absolutely not. But when a local becomes the target of federal watchers, judicial warrants and CAR sweeps the baseline changes. Add in forced DNA swabs and evidence processing, and you simply cannot look away. This is calculated targeting. It reveals a very focused operational direction, and that matters. Plus, there is another psychological component to weigh. Standard DNA might not actually close this. Sources say the FBI is pulling in advanced genetic genealogy alongside specialized microscopic hair analysis. This tactic is brilliant because genetic genealogy does not need the killer's DNA sitting in some state database. Analysts map backward, through unknown family trees, meaning a ghost who has completely avoided arrest can still be hunted down. This exact strategy has cracked decades-old cold cases. If it works now, the timeline accelerates rapidly. Detaining Luke Daly might actually be just one of several pressure tactics playing out simultaneously. He might not even be their only target. This is exactly how high-level, psychologically driven federal cases operate. We are watching multiple leads and diverse forensic traps moving in perfect parallel. While the public reads isolated headlines, profilers are quietly building a massive behavioral map that carries serious border implications. Think about Tucson sitting near Mexico, rumors out of Sonora, and talks with Mexican police. It doesn't guarantee a cross-border escape, but it proves agents are tracking that option. When federal profilers stretch their net internationally, It tells us the suspect's operational model is huge. Let's stay totally clinical here, because we still don't know if Dye's DNA matches what Sheriff Nanos holds. We have no idea what they dragged out of his house if partners exist, or if financial motives triggered this. Whether organized syndicates played a part remains unclear, but our baseline facts are solid. Day 79 was no accident. It was a highly calculated escalation. In behavioral profiling, that kind of pressure only happens when the physical evidence demands it. For Nancy Guthrie's grieving family, this fully shatters the previous emotional reality of this hunt. After 80 brutal days, you and I can finally see something critical happening. Detectives are no longer just gathering data. They aren't throwing darts in the dark. They are targeting. You and I are going to unpack this together. That psychological distinction could crack this entire investigation. In Part 2, I will break down the true forensic weight of that DNA on the gloves. We will explore why advanced genealogical profiling beats the CODIS database decode Sheriff Nanos' specific language, and examine how one historical abduction provides a terrifying psychological blueprint for exactly what criminal profilers are actively fearing today. By day 79, the media obsession around Nancy Guthrie's vanishing fixated entirely on one single haunting question. Where is Nancy? But inside federal behavior labs and sealed warrant rooms, the mood shifted. For criminal analysts, the immediate question felt deeply clinical. Who possessed the psychological and operational capacity to take her? That matters. Because once we profile who could actually execute this crime, the entire landscape shifts. We stop blindly searching and start analyzing the offender's specific criminal architecture. This is exactly where physical forensics become vital. Those black gloves found 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house were not merely tossed clothing. From a behavioral perspective, they are a strategically massive piece of physical evidence in this abduction. Why does that matter? Gloves serve 2 distinct functions for predators. First, they stop the offender from leaving identifiable fingerprints behind. Second, they trap biological residue from the suspect. Dead skin cells, sweat, and hair all stay locked inside, perfectly preserving trace DNA. An offender wears gloves to vanish, but they inevitably become psychological tracking tools. In Nancy's case, forensic teams confirmed male DNA was pulled directly from one nearby glove. But this was not a clean profile. The sample reportedly held genetic material from multiple people. That presents a massive forensic hurdle. Mixed genetic samples demand intense separation, isolation, and highly complex comparative analysis. That process is never fast. Many misunderstand these forensic timelines simply because crime shows portray DNA matching as instant. Real behavioral investigations are agonizingly slow, especially when multiple contributors exist and the biological samples are degraded. Harsh outdoor exposure, potential trace contamination, and the strict need for legal certainty drag out the timeline. That is exactly why Sheriff Nanos warned that results might take months. Stick with me here. You and I must understand, this delay isn't weakness. It signals deep complexity. This is where public impatience around forensics turns genuinely dangerous. Lacking an immediate DNA match does not mean investigators lack a suspect. The absolute opposite is true. The combined DNA index system known as CODIS is incredibly limited. It only red flags violent offenders who are already logged in the system. If our predator never surrendered a sample, or if the genetic profile is partial, advanced genealogical reconstruction becomes mandatory. When that happens, the profiling process gets deeply sophisticated and ultimately far more powerful. Advanced genealogy could be the defining psychological tool here. Forensic family mapping operates on an entirely different level. Rather than seeking a direct suspect match, it actively hunts for familial ties, distant cousins, and hidden ancestral markers. Analysts then build massive family trees, logically sever dead branches, and quietly narrow the psychological pool of suspects. This exact technique has shattered decades of cold case mystery. The chilling Golden State Killer investigation is our most famous example. In Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the behavioral timeline is modern and fluid. If analysts pull usable profiles, federal investigators will run direct forensic matching and aggressive genealogical reconstruction at the very same time. This is not routine police work. This is layered federal investigative methodology at its most clinical level. Now factor in the killer's geography. The FBI demanded surveillance tape from locals living within 2 miles of Nancy's property. That radius was not arbitrary. Profilers shaped these search zones using concrete evidence patterns and the predator's actual movements. We analyze escape routes, foot traffic, and psychological disposal zones inside that grid. When physical evidence drops 2 miles away and our prime target lives close, warrants in that zone become absolute necessities. That behavioral pattern is operationally huge. It isn't legally conclusive yet, but it feels psychologically heavy. Look closer. One of the clearest behavioral signals hasn't come from physical evidence, but from the exact language chosen by Sheriff Chris Nanos. He has remained remarkably calculated with his press statements. In high-stakes criminal investigations, public language is pure strategy. Watch this tactical move. When vicious rumors targeted Nancy's inner circle, including her son-in-law, the sheriff acted fast. Nanos made the incredibly rare choice to publicly clear them by name. That was a highly explicit protective statement. Yet when reporters asked if Luke Daly was officially cleared as a suspect, the sheriff coldly refused to offer that same verbal clarity. Instead, he firmly pivoted to the ongoing forensic analysis. This behavioral distinction matters because official public clearance always carries massive legal weight. If investigators genuinely wanted to kill the media rumors surrounding Luke Daly, they had exact protocols ready. They actively declined that option. In high-stakes cases, intentional official silence is always a tactical signal. So what do you and I take from this? That silence confirms their suspect is sweating under intense forensic scrutiny, locked firmly inside this active hunt. Zooming out, high-profile targeted kidnappings almost always follow a highly predictable forensic arc. This is established criminal behavior. Historically, such abductions require deep inside knowledge. This includes victim routines, financial leverage, intense surveillance, and highly meticulous pre-planning. Offenders rely on local familiarity, tight operational execution, and deliberately delayed evidence discovery. You and I should examine a historical true crime baseline investigators are absolutely reviewing right now. The Annie Laurie Herron case. Back in 1988, Annie Laurie Herron, a wealthy socialite, was snatched directly out of her own home in Jackson, Mississippi. A heavy ransom demand arrived. Pure extortion. The offender's planning was absolutely surgical. The mastermind wasn't some random assailant, but an offender nursing a deep-seated grudge, driven by clear psychological motive and intense tactical preparation. Her body remains unfound. That tragic incident serves as a brutal psychological reminder that profit-driven abductions often require years of silent plotting. No two crimes are strictly identical, but as behavioral analysts, we study these historical blueprints because core criminal psychology repeats. When the Guthrie missing persons case involves high-net-worth families and extremely serious ransom demands, expert concealment, and surgical execution, these historical parallels become deeply vital forensics tools. History doesn't exactly repeat, but the offender's underlying operational logic remains static. Another huge tactical complication here is the direct proximity to the international border. Tucson sits near Mexico, instantly creating incredibly unique jurisdictional and operational hurdles for detectives. Federal coordination with Mexican police exposes a deeply serious high-stakes psychological reality. Criminal investigators are preparing a search radius pushing far beyond normal local boundaries. This behavioral profile doesn't prove Nancy crossed the border, but it confirms federal agents treat that possibility as a credible threat, demanding massive search resources. The FBI never commits these massive assets unless the field intelligence is rock solid. At this specific phase, forensic evidence is piling up, but remains totally in flux. Standard DNA processing takes time, yet genetic genealogy could completely break this case open. All geographic leads converge on a single kill zone. Federal search warrants now point toward one highly specific target. Official statements remain calculated and intentionally vague. Behavioral patterns in professional kidnappings strongly suggest this operation involves a much wider criminal network. The total lack of a final resolution is deeply frustrating for the watching public. To lead criminal profilers, however, this quiet phase almost always indicates forward momentum. Major felony investigations are rarely solved with a single dramatic television reveal. They are built through the methodical accumulation of forensic facts until the offender's narrative becomes undeniable. That is precisely the analytical trajectory the Guthrie profiling investigation is following right now. Let's evaluate this together. We must analyze the strategic importance of the Black Range Rover. Hitting the suspect's home and car simultaneously signals a massive forensic breakthrough. We examine the behavioral infrastructure of ransom-based crimes and the search for active accomplices. Investigators are hunting a network. When federal agents hit Luke Daly searching his home and his Range Rover, this profiling case rapidly moved past basic circumstantial evidence. In the Guthrie abduction case, that specific vehicle holds critical forensic evidence. Surveillance showed a disciplined suspect moving with cold purpose in the darkness. Clear communication and a psychological grasp of police response windows are absolutely critical here. But professional ransom-style abductions always go significantly deeper. Criminal infrastructure complicates things because, unlike impulsive acts, financial kidnapping requires high-level operational coordination and focus. Operational success depends on layered surveillance of victim routines, highly tactical entry plans, and perfectly mapped escape routes. Offenders must prioritize forensic evidence, suppression, secure communication, isolated holding cells, and a viable extraction strategy. This calculated operation far exceeds the psychological complexity of a simple burglary, immediately prompting federal agents to step in. Investigators are definitely viewing this through a massive operational and psychological lens, focusing specifically on tracing that white Range Rover. Police officially seized and thoroughly searched the vehicle during a coordinated tactical strike on February 13, 2024. This maneuver is critical because strict search warrants demand probable cause directly linking the asset to tangible forensic evidence. Judges never sign off on these warrants lightly, deeply suggesting field agents possessed concrete leads regarding physical evidence inside. They likely tracked behavioral movement patterns, where the SUV's physical location matched high-level criminal intelligence and secret surveillance data. Undercover teams likely flagged suspicious operational activity. And while this isn't concrete proof, it strongly signals deep federal suspicion. The feds clearly believe this vehicle was forensically relevant enough to force a massive high-stakes judicial intervention. But you and I know better. Even without a direct DNA match, suspect vehicles provide massive secondary forensic footprints. Beyond basic glove fragments, investigators hunt for separate forensic pathways like unique transfer fibers, latent fingerprints, and stray hairs. Forensic technicians analyze soil transfer, hidden blood trace, digital GPS data, internal Bluetooth logs, and burner phone ping locations. Modern vehicle forensics are brutally precise. We analysts see an ordinary car as a rolling crime scene loaded with behavioral evidence. We are reconstructing so much more than just physical DNA. By charting every fraction of the suspect's journey, we map their psychological state. In a courtroom, movement proves intent. Today, let's unpack the dark psychological reality of organized criminal networks together. The public assumes major offenses are isolated acts by lone wolves. The psychological reality is far darker and heavily collaborative. High-stakes abductions almost always demand multiple specialized actors operating in perfect sync. We rarely see equal partnerships. Instead, it is a strict behavioral hierarchy: fixers, drivers, and scouts. You also see specialized handlers. This organized pathology emerges when the targets are high-profile, the financial payouts are massive, and the demands are psychologically complex. How an offender moves geographically reveals everything. And Nancy Guthrie's case displays several of these highly orchestrated, high-risk behavioral signatures. While we haven't officially confirmed a broader organized network yet, tactical shifts by police suggest a complex web. As analysts, we are exploring wider theories largely because several separate individuals were brought in recently. Investigators interrogated various targets throughout different phases of this probe, spanning across isolated locations and disjointed timelines. Behaviorally, these interrogations reveal a targeted strategy. Now, questioning doesn't equal guilt, but it proves our psychological net is expanding. Consistently targeting multiple people tells me federal profilers are actively pressure testing a vastly broader pool of suspects. This is textbook. When borders are involved, deep financial motives exist, and overlapping DNA scrambles the physical forensic profile. A suspect's need for operational concealment is huge. Tucson's geographic layout makes it a critical behavioral hotspot. The city forms a tactical corridor, a place where organized criminal entities consistently exploit major interstate transit routes. Domestic and international syndicates frequently collide here, leveraging established blind spots to transport illicit cargo. This does not automatically prove cartel involvement. Blind profiling is dangerous, but we simply cannot ignore that pre-built infrastructure. We must map out that wider criminal architecture, which is exactly why heavy federal involvement remains crucial. The Bureau excels at bridging interstate intelligence gaps and profiling highly complex, layered financial crime patterns. Federal agents deploy digital surveillance and syndicate profiling, while local units lock down the immediate physical crime scene. Federal teams dismantle entire systems. Their extended presence here points to a psychological puzzle much darker than a simple disappearance. This pushes way past a standard missing persons profile. We have to examine the suspect's chillingly high behavioral confidence. Security cameras captured an offender displaying unnatural calmness, to a profiler that screams a deep history of criminal exposure. It may not guarantee past violence, but it proves psychological comfort under severe stress and advanced experience with operational planning. Amateurs rarely possess this kind of operational timing. It is the behavioral divide between panicked first-time offenders and seasoned professionals. They might be a first-time kidnapper, but they aren't new to crime. That psychological distinction completely rewrites our entire investigation. We could be profiling someone already deeply embedded in drug networks or weapons trafficking inside this region's dark underworld. We are checking if an established syndicate supplied the specialized tools and getaway vehicles for this exact crime. Burner phones or safe houses, that dark possibility. You and I need to pivot here. Once we move beyond a lone wolf, we must psychologically map an entire network. For the family, this bureaucratic complexity is pure psychological torture. Every passing day without Nancy only amplifies their agonizing desperation. But tactically speaking, this slow complexity tells me detectives are meticulously building an airtight psychological profile, so these charges permanently stick. Intuition means absolutely nothing to a jury. Hard evidence wins. And constructing a federal abduction profile requires surgical, high-stakes, psychological precision. One sloppy behavioral assumption could easily torch years of grueling labor. That is why the feds just shifted into high gear. Executing warrants on properties and vehicles points to a massive forensic sweep, while physical DNA undergoes intense multi-layered lab scrutiny. Geographic profiling matters in this hunt. Still, official statements remain intentionally guarded, while analysts probe a potentially massive organized criminal infrastructure. The district attorneys haven't blinked yet. From a profiling perspective, that calculated delay hints at something significantly darker. This behavioral dragnet is expanding, not shrinking, and that massive operational scope will ultimately dictate if Nancy Guthrie's file is ever truly closed. The final profile might reveal a messy local dispute, a cold financial conspiracy, or a chillingly complex high-level operational assassination. Observing this slow burn from the outside requires agonizing patience. But for behavioral analysts, this is the most critical investigative phase. While the public craves immediate headlines, the actual truth is hiding deep inside quiet forensic labs and advanced psychological digital reconstructions. Stick with me as we track these deep financial footprints and decode cross-agency intelligence coordination. Let's look at the massive question hanging over this entire investigation. You and I know it's not just about who pulled the strings. It's far more psychological. We have to ask exactly how much evidence are detectives deliberately keeping hidden from the public right now. In major homicide cases, silence is never a mistake. It is a calculated behavioral weapon designed to squeeze a suspect. To the public, this quiet looks like a cold case. No immediate arrests, no media briefings, absolutely zero solid answers. But for law enforcement, that silence means something else entirely. It means absolute control. Once investigators know they have a solid profile, they lock down every single piece of forensic data. Why? Because showing their cards triggers a panic response in accomplices, destroys witness trust, and ruins future trial testimony. It triggers immediate evidence destruction and completely wrecks legal timelines. This means the less detectives say right now, the clearer their behavioral strategy becomes. Controlling the narrative matters more than making the public feel safe, even without instant charges. It all points to one psychological reality. Law enforcement is violently protecting their leverage. That leverage is critical when managing high-profile investigations, relying on massive amounts of forensic evidence. We're talking mixed DNA profiles, nervous co-conspirators, and heavy digital footprints. Now look at the massive reward money. Nancy Guthrie's family offered a huge cash incentive, reportedly climbing right into the seven-figure range. This goes way beyond generosity. It is pure psychological warfare. Big payouts are engineered to do far more than gather tips. These payouts are specifically designed to break criminal bonds. Cash completely rewrites loyalty. Criminal history shows this kind of money destroys tight cover-ups that felt totally bulletproof. Fringe players and accomplices start doing the math. They wonder if staying quiet is actually worth the prison time. Life-changing money makes suspects crack, especially in a conspiracy where several different people are hiding the truth. When a group shares a dark secret, pure financial greed becomes the ultimate trigger for betrayal. Since the cover-up was so clean, let's look at how detectives use that cash as a psychological scalpel. This is not simply a plea for public help. It is a highly calculated gambit matching federal behavioral tactics. Profilers know DNA and fingerprints only tell half the story. The other half is pure crushing mental pressure. They use search warrants, media payouts, and cell phone tracking to squeeze the suspects until someone finally snaps. Fast arrests aren't the primary goal. Investigators want to destabilize the social dynamic, because panicking suspects always make stupid mistakes. They chatter on phones, move the body, and grow paranoid until they betray each other. Every single panic response generates fresh, undeniable evidence. Now focus on this crucial behavioral tell. When Sheriff Chris Nanos mentions evidence under active review, he is doing far more than feeding the press. He is signaling a relentless forensic timeline, covering everything from genetic sequencing to ripping data off hard drives. This means deep vehicle scans, bank audits, and aggressive suspect mapping, all happening quietly in the background. We only see the calm surface. Underneath, profilers are dissecting multiple layers of classified data. Now, let's analyze their interrogation tactics. Watching how a suspect answers questions reveals far more than the words they actually say. Detectives haven't leaked interview transcripts, but their behavioral shifts prove tactical questioning is in full swing. Every single detention, every release, and every forced separation of targets shows analysts are running a highly calculated psychological playbook. Look at the timeline pressure. Cops isolate suspects to forensically map out every conflicting lie in their stories. Interrogators actively hunt for contradictions, weaponizing tiny lies into massive cognitive traps that completely destroy a legal defense. Backed by hard physical proof, this psychological trap closes slowly, but hits like a truck in court. Think about the underlying logic. In a group, crime profilers are never just hunting the primary killer. They want to mentally dismantle the entire criminal network. Who planned it? Who dumped the body? Who wiped the evidence? Who got paid? In organized hits, the guy caught on camera is almost never the psychopathic architect running the show. Federal profilers exploit this exact dynamic. Look at forensic genealogy, where one stray DNA marker flips the entire power dynamic overnight. When genetic tracing locks down a family tree, it creates the massive psychological pivot prosecutors dream of. It takes a cold profile and builds a rock-solid case. Once that domino falls, the legal pressure builds fast. Subpoenas drop and grand juries wake up. But until that breaking point, profilers maintain a total blackout of information. What you and I are watching isn't a stalled case at all. This silence is the terrifying sound of federal preparation. You and I know digital evidence is the true psychological frontier. Modern homicides aren't just solved at crime scenes anymore. A suspect's phone, GPS, pings, cloud data, and car telemetry leave a behavioral trail they can never truly wipe clean. People think hitting delete erases intent. They are wrong. Federal profilers and digital labs specialize in pulling wiped location memories. Teams recover Bluetooth connections, search habits, and fractured pieces of hidden texts. A suspect assumes their tracks are dead, while investigators quietly rebuild their psychological timeline brick by brick. If this was a calculated hit tracing, their digital footprint will expose their motives better than any eyewitness ever could. Machines don't forget. The public just sees months of agonizing delay. But inside the task force, we see a methodical psychological case construction taking shape. That foundation is everything. When you only get one shot, Prosecutors demand far more than a simple arrest. They need a psychological lock. That requires evidence with absolute forensic armor. The state needs cold proof, proof that survives a brutal defense strategy and the exhausting psychological war of criminal appeals. Investigators appear cautious because they absolutely are. That silence reflects the true psychological gravity of this case. Let's pause and look at the most haunting psychological aspect of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Despite all this brilliant strategy, Nancy remains missing. That raw, painful reality drives every single behavioral profile and forensic tool deployed. Putting aside the behavioral analysis and public pleas, the core mission is unchanged. Bring Nancy home and expose the absolute truth. True success means mapping the psychological sequence of her final hours. This is exactly where the darkest criminal minds lose. It only takes one arrogant mistake. One forgotten phone, a terrified accomplice, flipping under pressure, a single traced wire, or one recovered message. Organized criminal networks never collapse from mere theories. They shatter from one single decisive behavioral or forensic break. Federal agents are profiling their way toward that exact moment. So where do we stand? The hunt remains aggressively active. Massive federal resources are quietly analyzing the suspects right now. Physical and digital clues keep evolving. That huge reward is a psychological pressure point. Geographic profiling is key. The official silence simply proves their extreme prosecutorial patience. One major behavioral slip accelerates this case overnight. To the public, it just feels like a frustrating psychological stalemate. But for the perpetrators, this quiet waiting period is actually the most psychologically dangerous phase of all. The guilty minds always believe that if they just hide in the shadows, federal pressure will eventually fade away. They are absolutely wrong. Elite criminal investigations actually gain serious psychological and forensic momentum over time. Every DNA match, every digital footprint, and every psychological pressure point keeps grinding forward in the shadows. You and I know this cold, methodical profiling will ultimately expose what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Not through public panic, but through the crushing psychological weight of forensic certainty. Until that suspect finally cracks, this investigation stays wide open.